Okay, hello everyone. We are extremely glad to see everybody at our webinar today. Before we start, let's check our connection and get acquainted. So how do you read me? Please text in the chat box. Okay, great. Okay, well, that's great. And now I would like to say a few words about us. I'm sure there is no need to introduce Education Marine Project. So I would like to say a few words about En Route Language Center. So En Route Language Center is an educational project which helps maritime learners to enhance their knowledge through the prism of English language and prepare them for their future career at sea. Today's webinar will be held by me, Galina Galant. I'm an English language tutor with more than 11 years of teaching experience at National University Odessa Maritime Academy. I'm sure I have some of my cadets here today, so hello boys and of course girls. My partner in crime, Irina Arbatmanova, is a co-founder of our center, and I'm not afraid to call her the brain of it. She is a well-experienced tutor with more than 10 years of experience at the same academy. She is the co-author of the great number of teaching material related to the maritime English. So she's with us today. Say hello to her. Okay, poor quality of video. I don't know why. So here's some, so we would like to make this webinar as informative and easy to catch as possible, and would be glad if you participate actively and give us any feedback. Here's some rules that should be adhered to during the webinar to create the friendly atmosphere and spend time greatly together. We would kindly ask you to switch off your mobile phones as they will distract your attention. Of course, if you're not using them to be present at our webinar. No interruption is allowed. Let's omit politics, please. Be polite, attentive, and cooperative. So let's start. Okay, as far as you know that in the maritime industry, the ability to communicate effectively in English and prevent misunderstandings can be the matter of life and death. Every seafarer understands that the decent knowledge of specific vocabulary and basic grammar rules not only improve your professional image and increases the number of dollars in your salary, but also serves as the essential tool for the safe and efficient operation of the vessel. Yet, it is not only about routine communication with the crew members of mixed nationalities or ship-to-ship and ship-to-shore radio communications, because the great deal of information is provided in a written form. A vast variety of documents and with endless abbreviations, remarks, be it words and phrases, tons of routine and business correspondence. A seafarer is not only the man of the sea, a seafarer is also the part of the commercial and trade framework. So that is why the ability to correctly compose emails to owners, charterers, agents, and port authorities, draw up and understand basic documents, fill out reports and notices, apprehend instructions, is not just a useful skill for building good reputation, but also a guarantee that no mistake will be made that could lead to serious, undesirable consequences, especially when it comes to the commercial aspect of shipping. What is our agenda for today? Today we are going to talk about the parties involved in the transportation of goods, discuss contracts concluded between the parties concerned, look through the main documents such as the Fixture Note, the charter party, We will distinguish types of the charter party, how risks, costs, and liabilities are distributed between the ship owner and the charterer, and more precisely, we will talk about the voyage charter and such clauses as LAYCAN, Laytime, Demurrage, Detention, and Despatch. The second part of our webinar will cover business writing skills. We will give you some useful tips how to compose business emails professionally in order to sound formal. We will talk about structure and components of business emails, work on some samples, and of course, I will explain you what passive voice is and how it is formed. Okay, so the transportation of goods by sea is based on the contract of carriage and involves a number of parties. It actually begins with the manufacturer, the company that produces goods, particular goods. The manufacturer then wishes to sell them, so let us now call this party the seller and export these goods to another country, the buyer. So the two initial parties, the seller and the buyer, agree on the sales contract, which serves as the basis for the terms and conditions of the carriage of goods by sea. Depending on the terms and conditions of the transportation of goods from one party to another, stipulated by the sales contract, either the seller or the buyer becomes the cargo owner, that is known as the shipper. So the shipper is actually the party that sends the goods. The shipper then starts business relationships with the company that owns the vessel, ship owner, known as the carrier. And the two parties agrees on the contract of carriage that is compliant with the sales contract. And now it is when it comes to you, the ship, the master, and the crew. You are the direct representative of the ship owner, the party which has the least interest in all these financial affairs, yet assumes the greater responsibility for the safe and efficient transportation of cargo. As the ship with the cargo on board approaches the port of destination, the ship owner is to advise the notified party on her arrival, of course. Notify is the party that will collect the cargo at the port of discharge. Normally, the notified party is actually the buyer, known as the consignee. So the consignee is the final recipient of goods. However, the notified party may be the agent or even the third party to whom the goods have been promised by the original buyer. It's a common practice to engage intermediaries to facilitate the whole framework of carriage of goods. These intermediaries assist in establishment of contacts and making deals between the parties. Depending on whose behalf and for whose account the intermediary acts, this may be either the agent or the broker. The agent usually represents the particular party, while the broker brings two parties together and acts for both of them. Both the agents and brokers have informative, intermediary, and coordinating functions. So it all starts with a sales contract between the buyer and the seller. The sales contract stipulates the object of the agreement, which actually the goods, the price, the payment, means of delivery, the transport clause. This is one of the most important provisions of the sales contract, in which the parties agree on the distribution of risks, liabilities, and costs involved in the transportation of goods. The relationships between the seller and the buyer are mostly regulated by the Incoterms, the international commercial terms established by International Chamber of Commerce. The Incoterms are a set of predefined rules that provide specific guidance to each party concerned with the transportation of goods. Each rule clarifies which tasks, costs, and risks are associated with the seller and the buyer, and states in which cases damages may be claimed from the carrier. The latest version, the Incoterms 2020, contains 11 rules divided into 2 specific categories, principal categories, rules for any mode of transport, and of course, rules for sea and inland waterway transport. So let us now have a look at the 4 Incoterms that are related to the carriage of goods by sea. The first one is FAS, free alongside ship. Under this term, the seller's obligations are fulfilled when goods have been placed alongside the ship on the quay or in lighters at the named port of shipment. This means that the buyer has to bear all costs and risk of loss or damage to the goods from that moment on. FOB, or free on board. The goods are placed on board the ship by the seller at the named port of shipment as per the sales contract. The risk of loss or damage to the goods is transferred from the seller to the buyer when the goods pass the ship's rails. So stowage and trimming of cargo is normally carried out for the account of the buyer. Yet, such distribution of costs may be quite confusing. That is why several options of free on board term have been implemented. The first one is free on board, trimmed and stowed. The seller pays not only for loading, but also for stowage and trimming of cargo. Then free on board liner terms. As the name suggests, this option works for liner shipping service. All cargo-related expenses are covered by the carrier and then compensated to him by the buyer at a higher freight rate. CFR, or cost and freight. The seller must pay the costs and freights necessary to bring the cargo or the goods to the named port of destination, but the risk of loss or damage to the goods is transferred from the seller to the buyer as soon as the goods pass the ship's rails in the port of shipment. CIF, or cost, insurance, and freight. This term is basically the same as before, but with the addition that the seller has to cover marine insurance against the risk of loss or damage to the goods during the carriage. Excuse me for a second. So as we already know, depending on which term and sales contract, on which term the sales contract is agreed on, either the seller or the buyer becomes the cargo owner, or in other words, the shipper. Then the shipper enters into the agreement with the carrier, and the 2 parties conclude the contract of carriage. The contract of carriage precisely reflects the transport clause of the sales contract. The contract of carriage contains terms and conditions of cargo transportation. According to the contract, the ship owner undertakes an obligation to accept the cargo from the shipper, deliver it in good order and condition to the named destination, and hand it over to the consignee. And the shipper, in his turn, promises to pay the agreed freight. Depending on the type of shipping, whether it is liner service or tramp shipping, the contract of carriage may take different forms. In liner shipping, the ship owner acts as the common carrier. He runs a regular service between more or less fixed ports on a fixed time schedule and freight rates, accepting all cargo shipped between the ports that are covered by his service. A shipper who wants to book the cargo space on board a ship contacts the agent of a particular line, and contract of carriage, also known as the booking note, is concluded between the parties. Booking note is actually the request to book the cargo space on board a ship of a particular line. When the goods have been received or shipped, the bill of lading is issued on the behalf of the carrier and function as the primary contract of carriage. In tramp shipping, the owner acts as the private carrier. The ship plies between different ports depending on where the owner finds suitable cargoes. The freight rate is usually agreed between the owner and the shipper, depending on the type of cargo and voyage, and terms under which the ship is chartered. To charter means to hire a vessel on a particular ship or a part of the ship's cargo space for the transportation of goods. Thus, in the context of the tramp shipping, the shipper is usually referred to as the charterer. And the basic document here, of course, is the charter party. Just like in liner shipping, bills of lading are issued upon the reception of shipment or cargo, yet in tramp shipping, the bill of lading is mainly serves as the receipt for goods. Let us now have a closer look at the features of the tramp shipping and business relationships between the ship owner and the charterer. When the ship owner and the charterer negotiate all the main terms and conditions of the carriage, the agreement is sealed by the Fixture Note. It confirms the ship's fixture. Fixture is the word that indicates that contract has been made and the negotiations to charter the ship have been concluded. Later on, the Fixture Note is followed by the main document of carriage that is called the charter party, of course. The charter party governs commercial and legal relationships between the parties. Charter parties are normally made out on standard forms in order to regulate a number of clauses used in the document. Clause is a specific provision of a contract that relates to a particular subject. Such forms are produced by international shipping associations, such as, for example, BINCO, Baltic and International Maritime Council. The three main types of charter parties are the time charter, the bareboat charter, or it is also known as the Demurrage charter party, and the Voyage charter. When large quantities of cargo shall be shipped on several consecutive voyages, the contract of affreightment may be concluded. The standard forms of different types of charter parties may differ. For example, among a number of voyage charter party forms, the most popular is LAYCAN one. This one can be used almost in all trades as there are comparatively few standard clauses. Yet, some large companies draft their own forms of the charter party. They're called private forms. As the example, the Shell Voy, where Shell stands for the company name and Voy for the voyage form. Under the time charter, the ship owner puts the ship at the disposal of the charterer for a certain period of time. During this period, the charterer controls the commercial operation of the ship. The ship owner employs the crew and is responsible for nautical operation and maintenance of the vessel, the supervision of the cargo, at least from the seaworthiness point of view. The charterer decides which voyage to be made and what cargoes to be carried. Apart from the standard time charter, there is also a trip-type charter. The main distinction here is that the ship is chartered for a comparatively short period of time and agreed for a specific route. Then goes bareboat or demise charter. This is actually a lease of a ship from the owner to the charterer. This type of contract implies that the bare vessel without any crew is put at the disposal of the charterer for a certain period of time. The charterer takes over virtually the entire responsibility for the operation of the vessel and all the costs and expenses except from the capital costs. Capital costs are fixed costs associated with a ship's purchase, such as mortgage payment, for example, or registration fees or taxes. The charterer has the commercial and technical responsibility for the vessel and will pay for maintenance, crew costs, insurance, and so on. This type of charter is quite unusual, and in most cases, it is connected with the purchase option after the expiration of the charter period. Then goes the voyage charter. As the name suggests, the voyage charter, under the voyage charter, the vessel is hired for a single voyage. The ship owner undertakes to carry the cargo from the nominated destination and must care for the goods while they are under his control. The most important aspects of negotiations and the ship's fixture must be stipulated in the charter party, which are the description of the ship and the voyage, the type and quantity of cargo, specification and payment of freight, laytime, liability and allocation of duties, costs in connection with loading and discharging of cargo. When the ship owner and the charterer agree on the terms and conditions of the voyage charter, one of the most important aspects to be discussed is, of course, the present position of the ship. Because knowing the present position of the vessel, the charterer is able to assume the approximate term of ship's arrival at the port and, of course, her readiness for loading. To keep the charterers and other parties concerned informed about the vessel's position and ETA at the respective ports, the master is to give the ETA notice so that the parties have a chance to prepare documents and the cargo and arrange everything for loading or discharging operations. In voyage chartering, the risk of delay during the sea voyage rests with the owner. The period when the ship has to present the vessel to the agreed port is specified in the charter party under the LAYCAN term, or LAYCAN clause, actually. LAYCAN is the abbreviation for the lay days and cancelling. Lay day is the earliest day when the ship owner is obliged to put the vessel at the disposal of the charterer at a particular port and make her ready for the loading. If the vessel arrives earlier, the charterer has no obligation to accept her. Cancelling is the last day or the deadline, after which if the vessel arrives later, the charterer has a right to reject the ship and actually cancel the charter at all. The ship is deemed to be at the disposal of the charterer when she considered as the arrived ship. So what does it mean? First of all, this must be the geographical arrival. It means the vessel has reached the loading or discharging destination as the stipulated in the charter. Then, legal readiness. All port formalities have been completed, the free pratic obtained, the ship has been cleared by the customs. Then goes the physical readiness, which means that the cargo, actually it is related to the cargo worthiness of the vessel, because the cargo handling equipment must be ready for use, cargo holds must be clean and accessible for the reception of the cargo. And finally, the notice of readiness has been tendered.